Welcome to Nature Connects, TNC Massachusetts' webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, influencers, and our partners in New England and beyond. Thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Steve Long, Director of Policy and Partnerships for TNC in Massachusetts. We have an exciting program today. We'll be joined by Jonathan Guzman as we take a look at how local organizations are working to ensure that state funding is equitable and prioritizes those communities that are first and worst impacted by climate change. Before we dive into today's program, I wanted to share a little bit about our guest. Jonathan grew up in Puerto Rico and relocated to Lawrence in 2010. He started with Groundwork Lawrence in 2021 as the Public Affairs Coordinator and now serves as the External Affairs Manager. He oversees the We Are Lawrence platform and serves Lawrence's future generation as a vice chair and member of the Lawrence School Committee. In addition to his work with the Groundwork Lawrence, Jonathan has been a fabulous partner in a project I'll be describing a little later about sustainable and equitable climate funding. And as you think of questions for Jonathan or me, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be happy to help you out. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today. I've really greatly appreciated working with you, and I'm going to pass the mic on to you to get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve, so much for this opportunity for everybody. Just for purposes of the presentation, I am going to go off camera just to ensure that we're able to go through these as quickly as we can. And I do want to thank everybody again for being in the space. Overall, I'm really happy that I've been able to join Groundworks, and Steve mentioned a little bit of my background. Overall, at Groundwork Lawrence, I am able to support what is the perspective of policy, advocacy, and implementation throughout our work at Lawrence and around the Merrimack, but overall, we're able to engage in the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give you just a little speech about overview about Groundworks and our mission. And I will say that when we talk about overall what we do at Groundworks, we firmly believe that when residents and community are part of our decision making, it really develops some ownership perspective. And our vision is changing places, changing lives, and changing systems. And we take this very seriously through the implementation of our mission. And to sum it up, right, we truly believe that when you have residents in the table doing this with you, alongside you, it really creates this perspective of healthier communities. And we have a purpose of ensuring that there's some ownership there when we are making decision-making community engagement. Next slide. Before we enter into this conversation perspective, I wanted to give an overview about the city of Lawrence, and I wanted to recognize that it's really essential that we're covering this. So once upon a time, Lawrence was acknowledged as the nation's largest manufacturing hub, that we were able to develop machinery, textile, footwear, paper goods, computers, and food. And the Essex Company bought this piece of land many years ago, after acquiring it from our neighbors next door, Andover and Methuen. And this is essential, right? Because we're able to witness how this community emerged from a corporation and through industrial water power to start what it is an industrial work in the city. And throughout the years, we were able to develop from a town to a city, an immigrant community. And many of you might remember that something called the Bread and Roses strike, right? The working individuals being able to demand better working conditions in the community. And overall, when you speak about Lawrence, you think about a low-income community, and through guided principles, we have been able to really push this new definition of environmental justice, right? An environmental justice community. And we are particularly a community that, compared to this, the state medium household income, the population annual income in Lawrence is less than 65%. And with an active minority community that accounts for more than 80%, and recognizing that 71% of public school students, did not learn English as their first language, and that 41% of residents were born outside of the United States. So Lawrence was never built for wealthier communities, wealthier families to live in, right? It was built to make money. It's a space brought to bring minorities in, to partake in this discriminatory practices against them that really pushed them away from society, open space, and there was no protections to help thrive our Merrimack River, Spigot River, Chawshing River. And for these reasons, Groundwork Lawrence was founded in 1999, and the environmental justice conversation started then, right, to create more open space, plant more trees, and bring that opportunity. GWL really creates the building blocks for healthier communities and empowers residents to improve their quality of life. And still today, we have a lot more to do. Next slide, please. I wanted to just give you this quote from our Undersecretary Belen Power, who was not only the first Latina to be appointed under the Governor Haley administration, but the first Environmental Justice and Equity Undersecretary in Mass. And it is about time that we have somebody like Ms. Belen Power, a good friend, that has been acknowledging the environmental challenges that communities like Lawrence still face, including soil, water contamination, and air pollution, right? So when she was in the city of Lawrence, Groundwork Lawrence had the chance to show her around. We took her to what is behind her in her picture here, Manchester Street Park, which is next to the Spigot River. And believe it or not, this was a garbage incinerator years ago, and now it's a playground, it's an open space. It begins our greenway, which actually goes throughout the city. And I would like to now bring attention to a particular report that happened in 2022, the climate risk assessment that was put together by the Woodwell Climate Research Center. So the Woodwell Climate Research Center was committed to creating a tailored climate risk assessment in 2022 that will assist Lawrence local government officials in making planning decisions and demonstrating throughout the science, technology, and really putting out there the climate change effects and frequency of seriousness of physical hazards. And what you're seeing here before you in these slides on figure 1 and figure 2 is that according to the Nationalis 14, there was a particular article published that there was going to be 100-year rainfall amount in Lawrence that by 2040, it was going to increase by 10.97 inches. And by 2070 to 2090, it was going to further rise by 13.3. And you can see that capture on figure 1 and figure 2, and where you see how historically over time, we're going to see this cause of rainfall increasing within the city of Lawrence. And of course, when we talk about increasing rainfall, it translates to a larger stream flow and an increase on floods to happen. And we're going to be talking that on to the next slide. So this right here illustrates how, if there's an increase in rainfall, it results in larger stream flows and again, a greater flood challenge. And due to the Spigot and Merrimack River intersection on the eastern edge of the Lawrence city limits, right, there's commercial municipal district. It will include, in those areas, you actually have two areas, which is the Lawrence General. We have the courthouse in Lawrence, and these are vulnerable areas that are going to be vulnerable to the flood effect. And figure 3 really illustrates that, and where the slighter the dark green gets is where throughout the years, it increases on the flood, the additional areas that will get flooded over the 100-year event from 2051 to 2080, you're going to be seeing that incrementation of flooding happening within the city. And I want to just point out that 2006 Mother Day flood in Lawrence, as you can see, that was us years ago. And since then, we've been lucky enough not to go through this type of unfortunate climate challenge in our city. Next slide, please. So here, I wanted just to additionally have a conversation on the future of droughts, right? That will be happening in Lawrence. And over the last 2 decades, Lawrence has experienced a severe or worse drought. This number is anticipated to rise from 6% to around 10% for the year of 2040 to 2060, making severe drought roughly 1.7 times more likely to occur. The Merrimack River serves as a primary source to drinking water for the city of Lawrence. And when the river flows is low, it can affect how much potable water is available for the city citizens and our businesses. So the extreme rising temperatures do not help this challenge. And anyone engaging in physical activity outdoors are really in danger for heat challenges within our community. And when we think about how as climate gets warmer, right, Lawrence can expect to see an increase in those numbers of particular days. So I know that last year we only experienced one, but there is a particular number, and through this data, which is available to anybody that would like to review it, we're looking at a 5-day incrementation, and where it can feel like 103 degrees Fahrenheit degrees out there. And this is expected throughout the 2040 to 2060. So I wanted to just give you a little perspective here, how Lawrence is experiencing this type of climate change really quickly. And one of the things that we want to explore, and Steve, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Overall, we want to make sure that we are able to address the imbalance that are happening within the community. So Groundwork Lawrence has been actively involved with the community to aid Lawrence into planning and build resilience future for our residents. We present our research and to these extreme precipitations, flooding and droughts and heat that are occurring within our city. But, going back to our mission, we are strongly pushing to have community involved in these conversations. So we created what is called Lawrence Palante, which is a group resident-led group that engages into these conversations and understanding that while they're looking into transportation, and that was their primary conversations that we're having with community among themselves, they started seeing that so much is connected and how vulnerable our residents are to the different types of health risks that they have to go up by every single day because of the poor quality of life. Next slide, please. So here again, bring it back to community, right? The image here captures a real community dialogue by spending the time to educate, involve, and give them, our residents, the chance to participate in the decision-making process when everyone in the community has met them where they are. And that's how we see success happening overall when we do these type of conversations. Next slide, please. This is a quick quote that I wanted to leave you with. It's a statement made by a former task force participant who later now became our director in workforce and education. So we're really happy to have Jorge in our space now, because he recognized the urgency of the situation in the city of Lawrence and the lengthy efforts that is required to reimagine our city while making sure that the residents are aware of the issues that are present currently and ensure that they're involved in these discussions. Next slide. So just to sum it all up, while there are policies that encourage restricted financial resources to reach environmental justice communities, some of those communities have not been successful in putting strategies into place to deal with climate challenges. For the first time ever, Lawrence has a pro bono energy and environmental advisor who has been successful in pursuing and speaking with the city council to approve and creating a full-time position that will handle this work. He was also able to reveal the injustice of mass save as a residents of Lawrence pay into these services, but are not using that, right? So resulting in millions of dollars going to waste. Right now, we must pass a particular bill that Steve is going to speak about more further into this conversation today to ensure that these communities obtain unrestricted funding that allows them to get ready to get for these challenges, right? It's something that they receive funding, but when they don't have a structured bill prior of that funding coming in, it really puts them behind. So I would like to just return it to Steve at this point, because he and his team perfectly have captured this idea of meeting those with lived experience where they are and providing both the resources and capacity to be successful. Thank you.
Jonathan, thank you so much. It's been so great having you as a partner, and so great seeing the work that Groundwork Lawrence is doing, especially engaging communities that are being hit first and worst and sourcing the solutions from them. And I think that's what we've been trying to do with this project here. So what I want to do is describe what this project is all about, how we got there, and then also what the legislation looks like. So really, our coalition of conservation, environmental justice, and community-based organizations has worked together for about 2 years towards more equitable funding and solutions to reduce the causes and impacts of climate change. And we know Massachusetts doesn't have enough money, despite the state's efforts. And we know that the existing funding can reinforce some of the structural, racial, and economic inequities in our state. So our goal was really to take a more holistic approach, to take a people-centered approach, because climate change isn't just an environmental problem. It's a problem that affects our health, our well-being, and our economy. And we wanted to support the communities that are hit first and worst and that are impacted by climate change, and hear directly from them and collaborate and co-create with them. So this is a bit of how we did this. This is the who, the key players. We wanted to work towards the equitable outcomes, and we did need those firsthand expertise from community-based and equity-focused grassroots organizations. So we engaged the leaders of those organizations to participate in this project, especially those working in communities of color and low-income communities with environmental justice populations across Massachusetts. And we wanted to really build these relationships. So we worked with an equity consultant. You can see the green blob at the top. The Institute for Sustainable Communities helped us develop the equitable processes, make connections with folks in community-based organizations and EG organizations. And we really wanted to work with that consultant and our team to help build the frameworks for power sharing and making consensus-driven community decisions. Then we also needed a real understanding of what the funding options were. So we hired a funding consultant to look over the policy and funding landscape. And that expert, ARIP Global, had expertise in climate funding policies across the US. And that helped us learn what might be a good match for Massachusetts. And I think what I want to emphasize, what Jonathan was emphasizing about Groundwork Lawrence's work, and Lawrence, is throughout this project, the groups of experts work together, iteratively learning from each other and adapting our project to ensure that the legislation integrates social, environmental, and policy perspectives. So we were pretty methodical in our outreach efforts and our engagement efforts and our efforts to collaborate and co-create the solutions here. We wanted to build a more diverse table. So we conducted outreach and engaged representatives of organizations that work in communities with environmental justice populations and low-income residents. And we were very intentional about having conversations about meeting people where they are, about inviting people to the table and compensating them for their time. And when we're doing this work, we really think about the spectrum of engagement, and we try to get to the far right-hand side in the blue, where we're co-creating and deferring to people's expertise who have this lived experience. And we really wanted those community-based organizations that we hadn't worked with much before in the past. We wanted to share power. We wanted to build shared ownership of the process and the outcomes. So this spectrum of engagement was really helpful in helping us collaborate and figure things out. And it wasn't a one-size-fits-all. There were some groups that we did outreach to and got some input from them. There were some groups who were definitely deeply engaged, but the collaborators and the co-creators were the ones who really helped inform what the legislation looks like. So we really needed some frameworks. We always said, how do we operationalize this? How do we have the tools and the frameworks that help us do this work? So we had a couple of different things. One was community agreements, and those community agreements were really about how we commit to work together and support each other and have equal footing among all the partners. And anytime we had a meeting, we would start off with the community engagements to remind us, to refresh us, and to make sure that everyone held each other accountable. We didn't want any one person to feel it was his or her responsibility. We then worked with our equity consultant and our team to develop a decision-making framework. We wanted to make sure that, that we were working towards agreement, that we agreed to agree. And what did we mean by consensus, and how did we achieve agreement among the members of the team? We also developed guardrails and guidelines, and it was basically requirements were the guardrails. What are the non-negotiables we don't want to see in the legislation? And what are those boundaries that we'd set up? And the guidelines are more about the how. They're the principles and priorities, more like the way solutions would be implemented and experienced at the community level. So all of this really came together in the piece of legislation. And we, in summary, the legislation would establish a fee on property insurance, deposit those funds into a trust, and that trust would be used to provide solutions to address the causes and impacts of climate change. And there could be other funds deposited into that trust as well. Now I'm going to describe the who, the what, and the how the funding works, flowing from this trust fund and going to solutions. So first, the funding would flow to state agency programs, to municipalities and nonprofit and community-based organizations that are working at regional and local scales to address climate change mitigation, the causes of climate change, and adaptation, addressing the impacts of climate change. The funding would focus on solutions, and we were not being prescriptive. When you draft legislation, you can authorize or you can direct. So we were authorizing, and we're providing a flexible menu of options in the bill with prioritization on environmental justice and low-income populations who've been hit first and worst. So some examples of what we heard from our community-based partners and our EJ partners of what would make sense to go on that menu is making homes and communities safer from extreme weather, like Jonathan was describing, the flooding and the heat, reducing heat stress for residents and especially outside workers, encouraging partnerships between municipalities and local NGOs and community-based organizations, providing support such as municipal sustainability coordinators. Jonathan was talking about Jorge working in his community, and making it sure that communities have the capacity to do this work, creating jobs and workforce development, fostering nature-based solutions, and making sure that, such as tree planting, making sure that nature has a role, supporting education and outreach to those rendered vulnerable. So that's the what. Now talking about the how, we decided that it would be important to have an independent board that would be comprised primarily of community-based organizations that would be making the decisions about how this funding, what the money gets spent on and how it gets spent. And it would be guided by the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs and staffed by her staff. The board would select from that menu of options. The board would use prioritization criteria that's in the bill, those guardrails and guidelines. And the board would make sure that the programs that are implementing these solutions are clear and transparent and accountable to the board. And the basic vision we had was the money would flow to state agency programs. It would support those programs that already meet equity goals. It would then tweak those programs that need a little fix to meet equity goals, and then create new programs to meet those equity goals, to fill those gaps. So we really emphasize the role of the board in this decision-making, and we have some terrific legislative partners. The chief sponsors of the bill are Senator Sal DiDomenico from East Boston, Natalie Blais from the Connecticut River Valley, and Pat Duffy, who is also from Western Massachusetts. So we had a really good cross-section of legislators who represent EJ populations, who represent gateway cities, and also low-income rural populations. So now that you've heard all about this legislation, you might ask yourself, what can I do about this? So we would ask you to contact your legislators in support of the equitable and sustainable funding for climate change adaptation and mitigation legislation. The bill numbers are here. You can go to the legislature's website. If you don't already know who your legislators are, you can go there and find out who they are. So that's the end of the presentation. And I just wanted to thank Jonathan so much for sharing your incredible work and your knowledge with us, and wanted to dive into audience questions. And just as a reminder, if you think of questions for Jonathan or me, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. All right, so I see a question here. Jonathan, what are some of the solutions mentioned in the legislation that really made sense for you to line up with what Lawrence needs?
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, so for that specific area, the legislation overall, if you think about it, brings the experts, the individuals at the community doing the work day by day, to really engage into this commission, right? To understand what are the different areas of climate resiliency work that we need to do. When you talk about, urban forestry, when you talk about flooding, drought, stormwater, energy, right? Clean energy, the conversations are always happening. But then when you look around the room, are the individuals in that space representing those particular communities that need the voice at the table? So seeing this in the actual language, it really brings us to the table to fight for this, because it brings the perspective of having community voice at those decision-making tables.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's really helpful. And you, I see a question here. Can you speak a little bit to what you mean by guardrails and guidelines in developing the legislation? Can you speak a little bit about how those impacted the project? And if I'm happy to take that one, unless you want to take that one, Jonathan.
I'm gonna let you take that one, Steve.
Okay, so I think one of the guardrails that we heard loud and clear was that the source of funding should not be regressive. Right now, when people pay the utility bills, a small fee goes to fund energy efficiency and conservation through the Mass Save program. The Commission on Clean Heat looked really closely at that program and said, gee, the money's not really being distributed equitably. In other words, we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So so that was a guardrail that we had. They didn't want funding to be regressive, to take from one segment of the population to another, the folks who can afford it, and then take it away from the folks who can't. And I think some of the guidelines are, how are these programs implemented? How do we make sure that the money gets to the community-based organizations? And so an example of that would be changing agency grant programs to say, it's not just the municipality that gets the funding, it can also be a community-based organization or a nonprofit organization that gets the funding directly. So those are two examples of how the guardrails and guidelines influenced what's in the legislation and the project.
And I might say also that when we intentionally had the conversation of who this legislation was going to impact, ensuring that they were at the table as well, and that conversation of fair fund distribution was happening. That while we were providing the funding to particular communities, that we understood that what they needed was the opportunity to build that structure. So as other sources of funding come through, they're able to implement those projects or the particular years or their communities' opportunities that they need to invest in.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if you could talk about, Jonathan, you've been in coalitions before. How did this feel different than coalitions you've been in related to advocacy?
So when it comes to this particular coalition, when you look at who's at the table and individuals that were not on the table but still engage into a level that we needed them to engage in, I really applaud this space for doing that. Understanding that, providing funding for staff to be in the space was not enough, that capacity issues were still there, that no matter if the individual, the actual persona could be in the meetings, was not a barrier, that they were able to engage individually with you, Steve, or being able to, you and Emma, right? Or being able to engage on surveys, on emails, just providing their feedback. And, when you build policy, it's not always perfect. So when you see people in the room that are okay with going through the process, getting comments and starting again, and going again and doing it again, and as many times it has to happen just to ensure that everybody's voice is at that particular policy, that to me is really not only I appreciate it, but is where you want to be, right? Because at that point, you did have community voice. You did allow both small CVOs to big CVOs and organizations and entities that are part of this work to engage in the conversation and to provide their pieces and guidance and obstacles and challenges that this particular law could bring to them.
I really like how you said that. It's all about a conversation, and it's all about moving forward and continually improving the legislation. And nobody gets a piece of legislation perfect the first time. You and I have been noodling about some of the challenges and some of the fixes that are already needed. And I think one of the things that I really appreciated about you was not only you bringing the perspective from Lawrence, but you knew the world of insurance a little bit, and you helped us think through the insurance fee. Can you talk a bit about how that worked and how you saw your fingerprints on the insurance piece?
Yeah, so I guess when the conversation came in on where we're going to get this type of funding from, right, and build the trust, insurance look as one of those areas that we could tap in, right? Different type of insurance, from property, casualty, flood, name it. And instantly, from my mindset on the insurance world that I was in a couple of years ago, I thought about what is going to happen to whatever charge gets put into this insurance that our residents have to pay each year or monthly, and thought about the consumer being passed on this charge, right? And what are the things that we can put into this legislation to ensure that we can avoid that, right? And what are the things that are gonna make these particular insurance company have to increase their premiums, right? So having language and where we're able to provide technical assistance and support in the legislation itself also helps us understand that, yes, we want to provide the funding that is needed for environmental justice communities to establish and have unrestricted priorities, even though the commission has liberty to look at this perspective, right? But also ensuring that these insurance companies, that there's some burden being placed on them, have some type of opportunity to be provided with technical assistance if they need to, if they need a type of resource to move forward and provide the resources that our communities need each and every day to implement what we're supposed to implement if we want to reach our goals for this state.
Nice. Excellent. So you talked about the climate assessment that was done in Lawrence, and a question has come up. Has the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, that's the program the state funds, where it helps cities and towns figure out their strengths and vulnerabilities relative to climate change impact, has the MVP program touched down in Lawrence?
So we are able, at least in Groundwork Lawrence, we have a special manager that Tennis Lily that take this project head on, and he has been in communications and in conversations with the administration of the city of Lawrence, as he's able to be in the spaces that they're implementing preparedness, right, for climate resiliency. So overall, when we look at it, it's what we're having the conversation in here, that what comes in through that and the resources that come in is to do the project, is to implement, but who will do it, you need to figure that out. And through MVP 2.0, we are seeing a change actually that came out. If folks have not reviewed that, and where there's more intentional capacity building of individual with expertise to actually support these communities that are obtaining those resources. So I'm really glad to see that that the EEA secretary is really pushing this way on providing individuals the capacity that is needed for that particular program and what initiatives they're trying to push. And, you know, again, we have an amazing manager that really looks into this work. Tennis Lily, he's had been doing it for years, and he oversees also our tree planting in the city, and you know, in collaboration with the city, he's able to support that. And we're already in planting season, so we're really happy that we're doing this.
Nice, nice. And I think MVP 2.0 is a great example of how the state is making changes to make that program more equitable. That program was launched in 2017, and 349 of our 351 cities and towns have used it to look at what's happening on the ground in their communities and figure out a plan. So I'm really hoping that should this bill become a law, that the board and the funding here will help provide the support for the MVP program, and also help it continuously improve. Because like we said, policy is a conversation. You gotta keep it going. So one question that came through was, how did we connect with the communities and people we work with on this project? And if you don't mind, I can try to answer that one. So I think we first had an initial core team of partners, and we worked with them to develop a list of community-based organizations and environmental justice groups to reach out to. And we had some help from some of those original core team members, and we invited folks to a conversation. And we decided it would be better for our equity consultant to have those conversations, to let people speak freely. And that really helped inform some of the work we were doing and helped us do some networking. We then did a lot of email outreach and phone calls to organizations and started realizing that people had limited capacity. So we said, let's do a survey and compensate people for answering questions in the survey, and then invite them to the circle through that survey, invite them to the table through that circle, that email chain through the survey. And I think, you know, one of the challenges of this project, it was done completely during the pandemic. So Jonathan, you and I have been working together for a while on this project, and we only met in person for our first time today. So we set up some really creative ways on using web-based tools for people to have input, whether it was a shared document that people could provide input to, whether it was providing documents in advance that people could comment on, and realizing that people were so constrained on capacity, we started having really good live conversations and working with our equity consultant to figure out how to really give people the chance to have some time to read and digest what we were providing real time, and then have a conversation about it and provide some really good framing questions, but keeping things open. So we weren't completely rigid. We were adapting all along. And I'll just say Emma Gildescame, our colleague on this project, is the whiz at that. She is so good at figuring out the smartest ways to get people's voices to the table. So that was one of the ways we worked with folks.
And I feel sorry, Stephen, and one of the things that I want to mention is how as community members, as CBOs across the state join the space, there was always one question: who is missing?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Who do you think is missing? And MIU really tap into those individuals, engage with them. I remember when we got reached out to just firstly had a conversation about the space of what the mission and goal is this space hoping to accomplish. And that conversation just sparked, you know, they really care about what is our points of challenges and how important it is that something like this passes, right?
Absolutely. And I appreciated one time when we were offering a time for groups that hadn't had time to catch up to do a 101 on the legislation. And there were some really hard questions about, you know, are you guys for real? Are you offering people opportunities to provide input? And you stepped up and talked about your experience. So I greatly appreciated that about you. I think one thing that was a really great coincidence is one of our partners, Diane Hills from our brothers, my brother's table in Lynn, got involved in the project. And, you know, she runs a soup kitchen that works with folks who are rendered vulnerable and provides a lot of support for folks in the community. And lo and behold, the newly appointed chairman of the Environment Committee, where our bill was referred, is also from Lynn. So when she was testifying, he was like, Diane, how are you? So having those connections is absolutely fabulous, not only for informing the content of the legislation and making it meaningful, but to show the policymakers that we have the authentic voices at the table and their constituents at the table. That was really cool. So someone asked how this legislation is different from ones I've worked on in the past. And I think the level of intentionality, and I'm usually a fifth gear person, and it was good for me to go to second gear and build trust and build community and really hear people's voices and not just focus on the latest report or the latest study, because there are plenty of experts out there who do reports and who present information, but people who live in communities are also experts. And just recognizing the expertise that people bring to the table was a real added value to this project.
And I feel like when you look at what I mentioned at the beginning of what is happening, like one issue or challenge that is happening in the city of Lawrence is the Mass Aid program. Like that particular legislation was, implemented to really move communities forward, right, and connect to the to what it is, clean energy, and decrease their carbon footprint, and is there. But through conversations, we've been able to understand that our population needs way more education on what the program is, and understand that it's there for them and that they pay for it every single bill, and where we do not use what we put in, right? So having somebody like Anil, who's the advisor for the mayor on energy, environment, and sustainability, he brought that conversation in and really shows how important it is for communities, specifically environmental justice community, low and moderate income communities, to have something like this bill that can help them increase capacity in this scope of work.
Absolutely. We heard time and time again that having that capacity is so important, because it's really intensive work to do outreach and to make sure that the outreach is done the right way, in the right language, in the right format. It's really important to have that capacity to enable communities and community-based organizations to apply for grant funds. And we heard so many times that it would be great if the state set up a one-stop shopping for grants, where you could go in like Yelp and say, hey, I'm this size community, here's what I need, here's how much money I want, and boom, you'd get this list of grant opportunities spit out. And then the second thing we heard was the application process can be really onerous. So we have this idea of what college people applying for college do now. They have a common app. They fill out one application, it goes to multiple colleges. Why can't we have something like that for communities and community-based organizations that are completely stretched thin? There are real practical nuts and bolts solutions that can be done, and have been tried elsewhere, that we should be doing in Massachusetts.
And you keep hitting that, right? Because I believe the first time we also just hire in the city of Lawrence, hire grant writers, right? That was expected on individuals within the departments that were applying for these grants to take that on, plus the programming work, plus all their day-by-day work. So the capacity was never there, right? Because of limited resources, limited funding that they have. And where Lawrence, I didn't speak about the budget, but like 70% of our budget goes to education. Imagine that, right? And the rest, we got to split throughout the city to ensure that, we have working lights and working roads, and you usually see this type of work as not a priority. So
absolutely. And I think once people realize that climate change is integrated into everything, it's the exclamation point on funding. I'm hearing about Rhode Island now. They adopted a program similar to our MVP program, but they also have a program where they have state agencies supporting outreach on public health. Imagine if we had a combined program that talked about climate impacts and public health in the same visit with a resident, and focuses on their well-being, focuses on solutions, makes sure that they're staying cool in the heat, that their air quality is improved, that they might have a tree planted in their neighborhood or their yard. So I think one of the major things that I'm taking away from all of this work is, how do we better integrate these programs so they're not siloed? So we have energy work over here and adaptation work over here and health work over here. How do we have a unified approach that makes more sense?
And you bring this alignment, because it's like every time that we have these conversations, like our team with the city in particular, and we talk about the municipal vulnerable preparedness, right? It brings the different areas that we need to tackle in order to, a community like Lawrence that was built as an industrial city, right? Where pavement is what you see, where heat is is dangerous. And we're tapping into, greening the gateway cities to increase tree canopy in the city and in other sources to ensure that we are really moving forward into this phase of meeting the goals, right? Not only for the state, but, in the different communities that we're in, and the expectations of requiring communities to uphold deadlines without the resources or the experts. It is not ideal, right? So, as soon this group came together and really focused on having that conversation of how can we bring other additional funding to these communities, environmental justice community, low-income, modern areas that can help a little further.
Absolutely. Those are some great wrap-up thoughts. I just want to express my gratitude for you being here today, for the partnership we fostered together, for the real deep knowledge and experience you've brought to the work, and looking forward to more collaboration, to working on the legislation and whatever else the world may bring us in collaboration. So I just wanted to turn to the audience and say thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks to everyone who tuned in, and also for your support of the Nature Conservancy. Your support is what makes all of this work possible. We'll be sending everyone who attended today a follow-up email in the coming days with a link to the recording of this webinar. And if you're enjoying the webinars, please be sure to share them with your friends and colleagues. You can follow us on social media at conserve_mass on Facebook and Instagram to keep up with the work and get updates on upcoming virtual opportunities. And always you can register for future webinars at nature.org/MA webinars. And our next webinar is going to be on June 1st. We'll be joined by our colleague from the Massachusetts Coastal Program for the Nature Conservancy for a look at the new developments with our oyster aquaculture and restoration program. So again, Jonathan, thank you so much. Looking forward to future collaboration. High five, and we will talk soon. Thanks again, and I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Take care, folks.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.